Eric, thank
Hello.
you. Thanks for being part of our project.
Pleasure to be
You've had a
here.
very distinguished career within the disability movement, so we're absolutely charmed to be able to have a chat with you, and it's a real honor. So thank you.
Thank you.
What we'd like to do today is just have a conversation, you and I. And I'd like to go back to your very early years in terms of maybe around age 7. And I think you had a bit of an issue with polio at that time. So could you sort of give folks an idea of what happened? How did you contract polio?
Lived in a small rural community in Notre Dame Bay. 7 families lived there. And in 1953, I was 7 years old. And I think there were 10 of us born at that time, 10 children, 13 finally, but I was the 7th. And in August of 53, I was playing outside, uh, as 7-year-olds do. And suddenly I got sick, and horribly sick, stomach, throwing up, vomiting, headache. And that's all I remember, really. I was rushed to Twillingate Hospital, and I didn't even know about polio, but the next morning I was flown to St. John's, um, and woke up 10 months later with polio.
Wow, 10 months later you woke up with polio.
Yeah, well, I mean, it hit me so hard,
Yes.
as it did a lot of people, that I was in an iron lung for 10 months, and I don't remember very much about it, tidbits of it, but not very much.
So what's an iron lung, Eric?
Iron lung is today's respirator, but it was a long steel tube that you get into, and they put a collar around your neck, and your neck is outside, but they breathe, they pump air in and out, and you breathe. So when I came out of the iron lung after 10 months, I was completely quadriplegic. I was paralyzed from here down.
So you had no movement in any of your limbs?
No movement whatsoever. And that's when rehab started here in St. John's in the old orthopedic hospital. I was there for a year after that, and gradually, as often was the case, my body won back over
Started
the
to
virus.
recover a little
Yeah,
bit, yes.
and my upper limbs recovered totally, and I learned to wear crutches and braces, and yeah, I spent 19 months in here.
So in a small community, were there any other children affected or contracted
Oh,
polio at that
yeah,
time?
yeah. I can't remember the numbers accurately. You probably have a much better idea than I do, but something tells me it was like 400 kids that summer that ended up
Throughout the province.
in the fever hospital, and they were from all over the province. That's how I learned all of the place names in Newfoundland, because somebody was from everywhere.
Everywhere, yes, exactly. Anybody else in your family, Eric, that had been affected by polio?
My brother Melvin was contract polio the next day, but didn't have any lasting effects. There was no lasting effects. He got better, and it affects the motor neurons of the spinal cord, and so it only affects motor movement. It doesn't affect sensory, so you have normal sensation, but no motor movement. And the motor neurons are attacked in the spinal column. A portion of them are killed, and the body fights back. If the body wins, you don't have any adverse effects.
Right, as with your brother Melvin.
That's what my brother Melvin did. And then anything from there to the virus overcoming you, and people died. So
Pretty serious epidemic.
pretty serious epidemic.
Yes,
Yeah. Speaking
absolutely.
of epidemics. Yeah.
So you were away from home for an exceptionally long period of time. You're saying you were in the orthopedic, I believe, for 19 months?
19 months. First time that I went back to my family after I left that morning on the plane was 19 months later. I came home in the summertime. My mom came into St. John's on train, and got me, and took me home for the summer months. And that was the first time I'd seen my family in 19 months. And fortunately, my dad had a brother living here in St. John's who was a constant visitor, and so that's how I kept in touch with the family, really, was through him. But yeah, spent 19 months here, went home, and then when I came back to the Sunshine Camp. So I would be 8.5 years old then, maybe, and went into the Sunshine Camp on Thorburn Road, and had a hilarious time there.
We both had experience at Sunshine Camp. I mean, we certainly have stories to tell, and
Absolutely.
I think we were there at the same time.
Some were during that period. You and I.
Yeah, you might have had some influence on me, probably.
Well,
you were probably 11, and I was
something like
6,
that.
something like that.
Yeah. But we had that was an incredible experience. I mean, when you think about how new we were to that whole epidemic, and how well the Sunshine Camp became organized as a rehab center, and a rehab center in a perfect setting, not like you would experience today, but it was a perfect setting because we had a swimming pool that was a natural swimming pool. We had a baseball field on the way, right in the middle of the woods, and we had lots of trails and places to run and play and have fun, and we did.
Yeah, I remember we had what they call the big playground and the small playground. The small playground was just for the younger children.
That's right.
Us older children, like 7 years, 8 years old, could go to the big playground.
That's right. And we could go down to the swimming pool. And what I remember about the swimming pool was that it was a natural pool in the river there, but they had it covered with ship's canvas, like white canvas on the bottom. So we were able to swim and walk on the bottom, or not walk. I didn't walk, but we were able to get our feet down on the bottom, and that sticks out in my memory.
I guess it was a way also of protecting other children who didn't have sensation.
Yes.
So they weren't going to, injure their
absolutely.
feet.
And all parts of because there were parts of the pool that you could lay down in, right? And you were laying on this canvas, so it was a great experience. But yeah, they had us organized in the big cabin, at a curtain from separating the boys from the girls, and there must have been 30 of us there at a given
Yes,
time.
I was trying to remember. I was thinking around 24 or 25, roughly, but it could have been a bit more than that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There was also, as you pointed out, there was also a children's or a kiddies ward.
Yes, the babies ward we call it.
Babies ward,
Yes.
yeah. And but yeah, there was so many different disabilities in the sense of level of involvement. There was maybe 3 or 4 of us who were walking on crutches in some way or another, and then there were some others who were in wheelchairs, and some who only had one leg affected, one arm affected, or whatever. And a whole
The variety was absolutely amazing because initially it was started as a rehab camp just for children with polio.
Yes.
But then the need just became so
Yes.
much greater than that.
Yeah, and I mean, in the days that I was there, it was predominantly polio, but we had a few CP, Winston Earl, I don't know if you remember him, but
I do.
he was CP, and we had a couple like that, but for the most part, it was polio kids, and
Any memories of shopping at the Sharp store?
yeah, yes, we used, quite often, we would get together in the afternoon, because my mom was getting my family allowance, and I think it was $6 or $12 a month. And she was sending it into the Sunshine Camp. And of course, every day you were allowed to go up to the office and get a quarter or a nickel or whatever. So it was quite common in the afternoons, a bunch of us would get together and get one of the orderlies to go with us, and we crossed Thorburn Road to Sharp's store, yeah.
So what was school like at Sunshine Camp? Did you go to school there?
Yes, there was a classroom. It may well have been the physiotherapy room that changed through the day to becoming a classroom, but I remember old-fashioned school desks being there, and I remember teachers, and school was a pretty neat experience in the Sunshine Camp.
Yes, because you were there with 3 years.
Yeah,
so.
I was there for grade, I think I did grade 1 in orthopedic hospital. And then I did grade 2 or 3, 4, and 5, maybe grade 6 at Sunshine Camp. But I think I skipped a grade somewhere in there because I was so smart, right? But yeah,
That's why we're interviewing you.
I know. But yeah, I did 3, 4, 5, 6, or 3, 4, 5, 6 at Sunshine Camp.
So when you were at the camp, beyond the fun that we both had there, you were doing, I guess, a lot of physiotherapy, occupational therapy, brace fittings.
Lots,
Did you do
yeah.
a lot of that, Eric? Were you wearing braces? And
I was wearing waist braces at the time. I didn't have enough trunk muscle to be able to stand and on crutches. So I mean, really got to be good because we would chase from the camp down to the pool, which is quite a hike, and play out in the woods, and yeah, it was a really good experience in terms of not just the formal physio and because we did all of that, but in fact, real life fun, chasing around, having a ball.
real life experiences.
Great experience, actually. Well, a lot of people said you must have had a horrible childhood. The only horrible part of my childhood was being separated from my family. I mean, we were a big family, we were a close family, and I got to spend from June to August at home. My dad was a fisherman. All the kids, all the boys, the older boys, participated in the fishery. And I was part of that for 2 months every summer, and got to really be accepted by family and be a part of family. But then, September always came, and the separation and everything that goes with that, and going back to St. John's, and it became a ritual. Mom would come in and get me, take me out, bring me back, and yeah, it was.
Yeah. The separation, like you say, must have been pretty difficult at those
Yeah,
times.
the separation
Yeah.
was rough, but our family was close, and I did try, just to give you an idea of the difference between now and then, but I did try one summer. I convinced my mom and dad to let me stay and not have to come back to the Sunshine Camp. And actually, that was the first year, now that I mention it, because it was grade 3, and I said I couldn't remember if I did 4, 5, and 6. It was 4, 5, and 6. Grade 3, I attempted at home, and I ended up, I think, losing about half the school year in days that I couldn't get to school. Because in the wintertime, the snow and getting there was just impossible. And the school was, hostile in terms of accessibility. But I did spend one winter, and I remember how good it was to be home. And then my mom announcing the next August that I was going back to St. John's, right? Because I didn't do well at school. Yeah.
Education, obviously, yes.
Right from the get-go, all my mom ever said was, Eric, the only chance you've got is to get your education. So you're not going to like it, but you're going to go back to St. John's.
Amazing woman, yes.
Yeah, she was amazing. She stuck to her guns, and it was no fun dragging me back to St. John's in August month, I tell you.
It was very determined for you to be successful. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you came back to Sunshine Camp?
Back to
So
St.
beyond the Sunshine Camp, then where did things go for you there?
Yeah,
In terms
well,
of housing and
yeah, after the Sunshine Camp, I got it to stay at the United Church Children's Home on Halton Avenue. And it was just like a block away from Curtis Academy, where I did my junior high and lived in what was an orphanage, but was called the United Church Children's Home. And I was able to stay there, and obviously the Rotary Club sponsored my staying there. And I did grade 7, 8, and 9 there. And grade 7 was an eye opener for me.
why was that?
Well, it was. Later years I heard all about segregation and integration and all this stuff, right? But in grade 3, grade 4, 5, I was part of a system that Other kids were disabled. We were competing with each other, and I was suddenly woke up, you know, in grade 7 in a regular classroom with regular kids, and it was an eye opener, I tell you.
A shock to the system.
Oh my God! I mean, I flunked out big time in the Christmas exams. I flunked out big time, and some of my friends that I had, who were not kids from the orphanage, but were kids in my grade. I mean, they just made so much fun at me. I was so humiliated.
You were way out of your element here.
Oh
were you
my
not
God.
there?
Oh my God. But you know what? I said to them, I said, you wait. I said, when I'm done, I'll make up for this total failure that I've had. And I got to know the teacher. I got some help from her. I got through grade 7 and went on to finish high school. I didn't finish high school at Curtis Academy. Stayed in the orphanage through grade 7, 8, grade 9. And then the United Collegiate opened in on where's Elizabeth Avenue? Yes. And we moved, I went to school there in grade 9, or no, grade 10 and 11. I did at United Collegiate, but still stayed in the orphanage. So I stayed in the orphanage throughout high school, and then the Rotary Club. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. I don't know, but the Rotary Club came to me, and Dave Russell, who was the president of Terra Nova Motors at the time, made himself known to me as one of the businessmen that were supporting my education throughout high school, and came and took me out to dinner one evening and said, would you like to go to university? And I mean, I'd never dreamed of going to university. Maybe I dreamed of it, but never thought I'd be able to. But anyway, he said if I wanted to, I could, and that they would make it happen. So I finished high school, continued to do what I'd been doing all along, going home summertime, coming back. So I spent my whole school life in St. John, but traveling back to my family in the summertime. And became really good friends with a lot of the gang that had polio. And those relationships stayed, I mean, for years, literally years. And while, I mean, throughout my childhood, which was an incredible experience as far as I'm concerned, but we were introduced to a scout troop at St. Mary's, and I became a Queen Scout while I was in high school, and so I lived a pretty normal life, but the introduction into mainstream education was a bit of a shocker. I did graduate though, and I graduated at the top of my class.
Congratulations.
So there.
Mom was proud.
Mom was proud,
Yeah.
and I was vindicated.
Mm-hmm. So, where to from there? In terms of employment, I mean, you're now a well-educated young man. And,
well, I did engineering at MUN for 3 years, and when I was finished, I mean, employment wasn't that easy. I went to Halifax, Nova Scotia, actually, looking for work, and found work in Halifax, and worked there as a sales engineer for 5, 6, 7 years, from 65 to 71. And enjoyed that time. Before I went to Halifax, I met a gal from St. George's, and she came to Halifax as well, and we both found work there, and we got married in 67, and had 3 kids. Now we're moving fast.
yes, we are. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when did you return to Newfoundland after Nova Scotia?
Yeah, that was sort of a milestone for me, because my brother Gilbert broke his neck in an industrial accident in 1971. When I went to Nova Scotia, I got involved in wheelchair sports through Don Curran, who was heading up
Yes,
the
yes.
Canadian Paraplegic Association in Nova Scotia.
No, there's a there's a leader.
There's a leader,
Good
is
memory
right.
there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He was very instrumental in getting Gil into rehab in Manitoba. And when Gil came back from Manitoba, I had been talking to my brother in Stephenville, who was interested in having me come back and run a small business that he had. And I just decided that I was going to do it, mostly because I wanted to be close to Gil. And he came back from Manitoba. We got him set up in his home in St. George's. He had 3 kids, and he did extremely well, I think. And certainly for me, Don Curran had an incredible impact on my life in terms of the way he got involved with Gilbert, and then kept saying to me, Eric, there's a whack of kids in Newfoundland with spinal cord injuries that aren't getting a fair shake, right? So he inspired me, I think. And in 1971, I came home. I had no idea what was going to happen, but I ran my brother's business for 2 or 3 years. And then I stayed involved with CPA, went to their national meetings, and I think in 1975, I went to the national meetings, and they really, put the pressure on me to do something in Newfoundland for folks with spinal cord injury. So that was the beginning of the Canadian Paraplegic Association. That was the birth of CPA. I came out of the national meeting with a $5,000 check to start up CPA in St. John's, which I did.
Which was probably a fair bit of money at the time.
Well, it was, and Don Curran had already met with the ministers here, and they had a commitment out of the provincial government for some additional funds. So I blindly,
You took on the role.
I gave up my job in Stephenville, moved to St. John's with my family, and started CPA in 1975.
So tell us about CPA in terms of what it did as an organization. What was its mandate, if you will?
Really a self-help kind of organization at that time, much more than it is today, but at that time it was very much a self-help organization who used people with spinal cord injury to encourage and help individuals, new injuries, get back into the community. And as I talked about, somebody in Nova Scotia helping me with hand controls, for other people it was helping them get housing, or other people it was helping them get work. And so the organization was really designed or intended to be a veterans self-support organization for people coming back from the Second World War and helping each other get involved back in the community. And that's really the CPA that I knew and was part of in the early days.
So that would have been 1975.
That would be 75.
And that period of time in Newfoundland, I know in the St. John's area, it was a pretty busy spot. Can you paint a picture for me in terms of when you look back at the 70s, what was life like for an individual living with disability?
There have been many times in the last few years, and I'm not thinking of Newfoundland particularly, but wherever I happen to be in this country, what happened to all of the disability movement? Like, where did it go? Where is it? And because in the 70s, as I was coming into St. John's, I mean, this place was alive, and the disability movement was young and lots of energy.
It was humming.
It was humming. Yes.
It was, yeah.
And I remember so well the hub,
Yes.
which Norm and a few folks like Norm
and Greta, yeah.
created, but really, I mean, with the movement, the disability movement in the province, things really started to happen, and I was part of it through CPA. I mean, I wasn't part of it through the coalition, but I was very much a part of it, both provincially and nationally. But that was really the mainstream of the disability movement in my mind, was middle 70s to the late 80s, I suppose. And so, yeah, so when I came to St. John's, I mean, the hub was a bustle of activity. And we were holding our own in federal involvement, in national involvement. And
But when you look at services, look at transportation, housing, employment, accessibility. I mean, as I look back, there was a big void there in all of those areas in terms of people being able to move, become employed, accessibility. And I think you did some work, Eric, initially on the buildings accessibility
yeah,
legislation and regulations. I think it was probably late 70s, 77.
77?
Approximately.
Yes, I remember very well Adrian Babcock, Quad, who came back from rehab and got involved as a lawyer with the province. And remember him visiting him at the Hall's home and him saying, you know, I want you to get out there and write an act. While I'm here, we're gonna pass a law. And we did. I'd been working, you know, extensively at the national level on the national building code and stuff like that. But we didn't have a provincial act or code. And so we did. We worked with the other organizations in town. We put together and successfully moved an accessibility act, which is somewhat unique actually to.
It was definitely at the time, for sure.
Well, yeah, and unique in the sense that, in my mind, we had a much better enforcement mechanism than a lot of the provincial codes that were fashioned after the National Building Code. At that time, it was certainly a huge improvement. And I don't think we saw anything substantial come out of that for probably 10 years because it's new construction, right?
It took a long time.
Yeah, it took a long time. But, I mean, you remember as well as I do what St. John's was like in the 70s in terms of access, whether it was to employment or education or building accessibility. When I look back, I mean, I don't know what was happening in the rest of the country at the local level, but I suspect it was somewhat similar because we were all part of, you know, collaboration at the national level, and certainly Newfoundland, I think, took a leadership in all of that throughout the country, and but clearly that's, in my mind, that was the beginnings of the disability movement that grew, that continued to grow, and accomplished a great deal. I mean, you know that obstacles happened in the early 80s and the whole human rights legislation. That was really the building blocks of a whole new society that we only can look at now and appreciate what it meant, because at the time it looked like a pipe dream, right? No matter what we do. I remember working on the National Building Code, and, you know, everything was impossible. And all we could do was chip at the iceberg because we wanted to say every building, new, old, or whatever, has got to be accessible. It didn't happen that way. But over time, just to depart for a moment, when you think about how those things change the future, when I was with the Premier's Council in Alberta later, much later, we were able to convince the Provincial Transportation Department to make a major commitment to accessibility of the city buses. And the way they did it was to say, you don't get federal funding to buy new vehicles if you don't make them lower floor buses, right? And at the time, everybody kicked up heels and said, but what's the good of that? I mean, people aren't buying new buses. Well, that was in 1985 or 86. I go to Edmonton now, and I can grab a bus anywhere at all and go anywhere at all, right? So, but at the time, it was like a major milestone as far as I'm concerned. And there were lots of those. There was lots of things happened that Newfoundland was very much a part of that. Really changed the whole world. Today we somehow take it very for granted.
We do indeed, yes. So you left us in 1982, off to the national.
Got very involved with through CPA. Got very involved in the probably the accessibility movement more than anything else. At the National Building Code level for a number of years. On the transportation side of things, I got very involved, and just part of the advocacy, not anything through self or my organization particularly, but got very involved. And so I knew what was happening around the country. And when I left CPA here in 1978, it wasn't to go and be part of that. I went back into business. I moved to Gander with my family, and we started a car business there that I kept for 4 years, worst 4 years in history in the automotive industry. We were financing cars at 22%, can you imagine? But that's what I did. I did that for 4 years, and stayed in touch with CPA because I was involved in wheelchair sports at the time and was back and forth into St. John's, and stayed involved with CPA. But in 1982, had an opportunity to be the executive director in Alberta, and took it and moved out there in 1982. And not unreasonable that in 12 years after I moved there that I would accept the position in Ottawa, mainly so that I could be more involved in the cross-disability movement, which I was. I totally enjoyed the 8 years that I spent in Ottawa, and got very involved at the federal level in every aspect of disability, and totally enjoyed working with other organizations. I think we made a real difference at the time because we were living in an environment, a political environment in Ottawa that was very receptive. And I mean, we would have monthly dinners with deputy ministers and get to really chat and talk about issues. And
Deputy ministers at a provincial or federal level?
No, at a federal level. Yes, for I think 4 years, I along with other organizations in Ottawa, would meet with the deputies once a month for dinner, and we would talk about issues right across and it was a great experience of, having an impact on them just through our own lives and our own involvement, right? I was at that time I was chairing the transportation committee, and we were seeing lots of good stuff happen. I mean, short of legislation, which is what we were really looking for, but guidelines, certainly we made a big difference in the transportation field.
Well, having the ear of a deputy minister and being able to meet with them on a regular basis, and the influence that had, even with legislation.
Oh, absolutely.
They're impacting discussions at our tables with that information.
It was wonderful. I mean, I consider the Ottawa experience to be was a great one in terms of understanding federal politics and the relationship between federal and provincial politics, because it was just our organizations were just a microcosm of that same kind of thing that goes on between the federal and provincial governments. Because as CEO of CPA, I mean, I experienced all of that in trying to build a national vision for the organization, and sometimes you win, sometimes you lose.
Absolutely. We've often said here that there have been a lot of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians that have had strong leadership roles at a national level. And I'm curious in terms of, you would have met some of those Newfoundlanders and Labradorians at some of those tables that you were at.
My God, Joe, I'm too old. I'm having trouble remembering the names, but Eric Norman comes to my mind as being one of the real go-getters who was involved with me all while I was with the National Transportation.
And Eric was very involved with the rail.
Very much
Yeah.
so, very, very much so. And so there are lots of names that come to my mind of Newfoundlanders. And like myself, you know, it didn't matter where I went. I was still a Newfoundlander, and I still like to come back here and compare what was happening with what was happening in other jurisdictions as well. So.
A lot of issues that people with disabilities experience on a daily basis and yearly basis, whatever. Any particular issues that you were that really sort of struck a chord with you, that you really want to make some change around, or that just stole your heart and said, we've got to do something here?
I mean, I think accessibility was always my pet subject, and trying to influence change at a macro level in that area was always of interest to me. I always believed that, you know, if you could convince people to take incremental steps, that you could make a difference. And some people, you know, not all people, but some people thought that that was too incremental, that we needed oversweeping changes. But I always believed that if we could nibble at making change in a way that would last.
Yeah, systemic change.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we saw it happen, and not surprisingly, I don't observe, I mean, being on the outside, I don't observe that there's that crying voice now
That drive,
around change. I may be wrong, I may just be too far away from it, but I haven't seen it like I saw it in the 70s and the 80s and even into the early 90s. You know.
Eric, as you look back, what do you see created change? Making the assumption, of course, that change was created. What created that change?
I don't think there's any question about that.
Yeah.
I think there's one thing that sticks out in my mind was the level of commitment and dedication of a handful of people. And
Interesting.
I think you know what I mean. I think, you know, if you think about local organizations and people who led local organizations and the stick-to-itness to stay with the organization. I mean, let's face it, it wasn't a cushy career for any of us who worked in the nonprofit organization, but yet some of us stuck with it, and you know, I think that was what more than anything else saw some change, was the consistency of a small group of dedicated people. And I mean, you know, they're not plentiful if you look across the country in the 70s and 80s and even in the early 90s. There's only a handful of people who had the experience and the commitment, the personal commitment, to this mission that we were on. When I lived in Alberta for 12 years, there was not a single evening that I wasn't committed to a commitment somewhere in the community outside of my work, and my work was, that's what my work was, right? And so if you look back and say, what created the change, what had the biggest impact on change? For me, I think it was a handful of people who were just tremendously dedicated.
Another question for you now. A really good one. I'm curious in terms of, when did you get the advocacy bug? I look back on some of the things that I've done over the years and when did I finally start saying, no, enough of that, we have to do something here? When did that happen for you?
I suppose there are two answers to that, because I think
Of course, you're only looking for one, right?
Yeah, very early in the game, when I got involved with CPA here, I mean, the first 5 or 6 years are learning years where you make all the
You're
mistakes.
kind of growing into it, yeah.
Yeah, you make
Yeah.
all the mistakes and you make all the faux pas, but you know, you learn the business. And then some people become addicted to it and other people don't. I think accessibility for me became a kind of an addiction. I wanted to be involved in every aspect of it. I mean, when I was with the Premier's Council in Alberta, I traveled all over the world looking at accessible transportation systems. And people would laugh and say, sure, anybody can do that, everybody's done that, but it isn't about that. It's about finding what's good and somehow coming back and influencing the systems in your own country. But I think the difference when I was with the Premier's Council in Alberta was that when we come back from something like that, there was a real commitment to apply some of what we learned. And the rapid transit systems in Calgary were a perfect example. I mean, we saw in Europe systems that would make up the difference for the height difference in the rapid transit systems in Calgary. And to be able to come back and bring that simple technology into play made a big difference.
Absolutely.
And same thing in British Columbia. So I was turned on by that. I mean, honestly, that was the kinds of things that I loved to do. And so it started with the micro stuff here, with the accessibility stuff. Because I remember the Disability or the Accessibility Act here in the province, for me, was a major win, if you would. Not just for me, but for the community. And I was honored to have been a part of that, making that happen. But later on, you know, when I got to Alberta and got involved with the Premier's Council, I mean, that's when, for me, my advocacy started to blossom as far as I'm concerned, because, you know, we were coming up with concepts like disability supports, like guaranteed annual income. And, you know, along with other advocates in the community, we were really bringing this alive and trying to make a difference. And I mean, in Alberta, we ran some great projects that demonstrated the efficacy of doing things differently. And so I had the opportunity in Alberta, in that role, to be able to, you know, get together with a whole host of government staff and talk about those kinds of issues. And I think I got the bug at that time and became very, very involved in advocacy, because I think that was the major part of my work with CPA in Ottawa, really.
So I want to go back a little bit to our conversation about the development of CPA here in Newfoundland and Labrador. I'm curious in terms of what it looked like for you when you started the organization here. How did you reach out to, I guess, not just clients, but the medical community as well? Like, you're a brand new organization. You don't probably have a lot of skills in terms of working with injured people.
No, that's right.
Even with the medical profession, they might have looked at you and said, well, you know, just because you're in a wheelchair doesn't make you Mr. Knowledge on spinal cord injury kind of thing. So, and even, I guess, connecting with the community, individuals who incur spinal cord injury, and the medical community. I know that's a very convoluted question I'm asking, but
No, I don't
pick away at it and let us know what it looked like.
I don't think it's convoluted, because I mean, it brought alive for me some of the challenges at that time. I came in here, and Norm Lush became an ally, because and he was respected in the community, and I think he opened doors. I think Dalla Maroon, who was a neurosurgeon here at the time, was an intelligent, young spinal cord surgeon, and he, you know, became our medical advisory committee for years, chaired our medical advisory. And so touching base with those people and getting them involved, I think, was key. But in terms of what the organization was supposed to be about, and I emphasize the word supposed to be about, which was really helping kids with spinal cord injury make a transition back into the mainstream. And I took that literally, and I took it personally. And as a self-advocate, or as a, what do we call them, peer, or,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
I took that seriously, and I believed that I could use all the knowledge that I had as a person with a physical disability and apply that to what our mission was. And so, for me, it was really only common sense. I mean,
Yes, and you also had a brother that was living with a
Absolutely.
significant spinal cord injury in the community.
and needing all of the services that CPA had to offer and then some. But you asked me about how did you deal with that? Well, I mean, the challenges were incredible. There was no rehab center here. No. Every person who got a spinal cord injury here, if they wanted rehab, had to go out of the province. There was no employment system that was working well for people with spinal cord injury, and so everywhere you turned, there was what do you do to make a change, including how do you get out to see all these people. I found Tom Bailey out in Marystown somewhere. I think it was Marystown.
Yes.
And I mean, he was back from rehab, wherever he did his rehab, vegetating at home, and had no vision of being able to do anything else. And I mean, for me, it wasn't rocket science to say, Tom, you got to move to St. John, you got to go to school, and you got to get your education. And so, individually helping people break down those kinds of barriers, to me, became what CPA was about. We had about 400 clients that Don Kern had given to me in a little file box when I started CPA in Newfoundland. Right? In the first year that I was here, I saw almost every single one of them in person. I got in my old Blazer and I drove across the province, and I mean, it was nothing for me to put 50,000 miles on my vehicle in 1 year, just chasing people. And I mean, we had, if you think about it, you can probably remember, but if you think about it, how many kids we had at university in those 70s and 80s that were spinal cord injured folks who were vegetating up until then back in their home communities. And to me, CPA was supposed to be about a peer helping a peer. So I was, and you know this because you were there and you were part of it, but for me, that was the message to CPA, is that that's what you're supposed to be about. And when I took that all the way to being the leader at the national level and developed the national strategic plan for the organization, said that, reaching 100% of people with spinal cord injury, that's our goal. That's what we got to do. We got to get out and meet them, and we have to help them make the journey come alive.
So we're talking about 1975 through 1976, 77. Eric, you must have come across some situations where you just wonder how people are surviving, because accessibility was literally, it was so poor in St. John's. I mean, you can imagine what it would be like in rural communities. And I would suspect that many individuals were living in completely inaccessible homes and communities.
I had a, we didn't turn our backs on somebody with a similar kind of disability, but not a spinal cord injury. I remember running into a kid, not a kid, he was a middle-aged man, living in a rural community down on New World Island. And he lived in a house that had no bathroom. He literally bummed his way across the road to an outhouse when I met him, and he was 40-odd years old. I mean, he wasn't going to go back to school, and he wasn't going to become a lawyer, but there was a whole bunch of stuff that could be done
to make his life.
And so, that's where the personal advocacy became, because maybe that's the difference. Because in the 70s, that's what it was about for me. It was not what everybody needs. It was, what does Tom need to get back to school, and what kind of supports does Adrian need to be able to go to law school in Halifax. And so there were tons of challenges. But, we were able to work on some of the bigger stuff, because we were, with Norm's help and Fowler's help, we were able to put together a rehab center down at the Miller Center. And when I left in '78, kids with spinal cord injury were being rehabbed right here. And I suppose to some extent still are.
Yes, yes, I believe so, yeah. Probably not as good now as it was then, because there was some great leadership with Dr. Lush and Dr.
Yeah,
Moore. I mean,
and you know, the biggest role, one of the biggest roles that I enjoyed playing when I was with CPA in the spinal cord injury area was working with rehab centers, because they become so, you know, nurses and physios in a rehab center, they become so institutionalized, they have no idea what the real world is like. So a lot of the work that I enjoyed doing, and I enjoyed having my staff do, was play the role of the connection for that professional in that rehab center with the real world out there. Let us work with you, and we'll find the solutions for this person. And we did, over and over again.
before we close up, is there anything that you would like to add from our conversation, or anything you'd like to touch on before we,
I see myself as a boy from the Bay whose mom taught him that if you're going to succeed, you have to do this, this, and this. And learning from her, I think I decided somewhere very young in my life that nothing was going to stop me from doing anything I wanted to do. And, you know, I'm 74 years old and I still get pissed off because I can't get in the car as easy as I could, or I can't do something else as easy as I could, and I had to give up flying and stuff like that. But still, I just see myself as a guy from around the Bay who made good, you know.
excellent. And we didn't get to talk at all about your piloting career at all. It would have been,
No,
that's
that,
for another time.
that was the fun part. That was
We never got to talk about fun parts.
My God, you know, when I was in Alberta with CPA and with the Premier's Council, I was lucky enough to be able to find a way to use my airplane as part of my work. When I was with the Premier's Council, we used to conduct all kinds of consultations, of course, all across the province, all the time.
So who arranged those consultations, I wonder, so you could fly all around the province? Did you have a hand in that at all?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, for sure. But I mean, you know, all I did was said to my organization, the Premier's Council, pay me car mileage. I'm happy with car mileage. I'll fly my airplane, take 4 people with me, and that's what we did.
Yeah.
That's what we did.
Yeah. So you did have some fun times along the way.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I had some fun times after I retired too, because I've been retired officially for 20 years now. And you know, I built a place down where my mom came home from. That was one thing that needs to be said. You got to find some room here.
Okay, we'll do that.
I always wanted to do something for my mom that was meaningful, and I knew that she played a pivotal role in my life in my younger years. And in 2000, she was 87 years old and ending her days in her own home, and was being threatened with going to a nursing home. And I came home on vacation one summer, and I said, "Mom, guess what? I will retire next year, and I'll come home, and you can stay in your own home." And to make a long story short, I did. Built a place attached to her house, built myself a condo, put in an accessible dock, an accessible ramp, bought a boat, and for 20 years now I've enjoyed living there and spending my summers there. You've had a glass of wine with me on my patio.
And I look forward to having
Another one.
a few more.
And my mom lived out her life for another 7 years and died at 94 in her own home.
What a great tribute to
So
your
it
mom
was,
to do that.
yeah, it was,
Yeah.
it was like, it was payback. It was to do something to
Good
care.
for you, yes. To clue up, I want to first off congratulate you on an amazing career as an advocate, as a leader, as a Newfoundlander and Labradorian. It's been my pleasure to sit and chat with you today Thank you so much, Eric.
Thank
It's
you.
been great.